joining us. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And we're so excited to introduce you to these fantastic candidates, Eugene and Pat Timmons-Goodson. Really quickly, I'll go over the agenda for tonight. We've got a lot to cover in a little amount of time. So first we'll hear from Mayor Pete. Then we will have a few questions for him, and Preet Bharara will be taking over as the special guest moderator for that portion. Then we'll hear directly from the candidates, Pat Timmons-Goodson and Eugene DePasquale. Finally, we'll have questions and we'll open the floor to you all. I'll ask that you remain on mute during the portion of the event while we're hearing remarks. But once we move to Q&A, you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can submit your questions down below into the chat box. That being said, before we kick it off, there were some fantastic folks that made this event possible, all of you. We are in the last full week of fundraising quarter, and so events like this make it possible for our campaigns to do the things that we need to do, reach out to voters. So thank you so much for supporting and making it a fantastic event. I specifically want to acknowledge a few of our hosts that went above and beyond. Charlie Cheever, Bob Trahan, Dave Margulies, Andrew Bosworth, Chad Little, Dave Fetterman, Craig Blanford, Bobby Jasek, Daryl Benatar, and Ambassador William Eco. Thank you so much for going the extra mile. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to our honored special guest, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Well, thanks, and a big thank you to everybody who made this event possible, and to the terrific team, and most importantly, in addition to being honored to be here with Preet Bharara, I am thrilled that all of us are here together to be supporting two fantastic candidates in Eugene DePasquale. Hope I got that right. Fellow member of the Unpronounceable Name Club, who I think really demonstrates the imagination we've got to bring to offices that aren't always in the headlines, like Auditor General, and now take that problem-solving experience and that experience of defending the well-being of those who sent him into office into Congress. And then in Pat Timmons-Goodson, somebody who, by her story, by her example, and as you're going to see if you haven't already, by her demeanor and insight, is exactly what we need. And they're going to be terrific colleagues at each other's side, helping us launch the era that's got to come after the one that we're living in right now. I still hold out hope that we could be looking back on 2020 as a bright moment in American history. I know that's a strange thing to say, given how bleak and painful and deadly and punishing and anguishing this year has been. But the story of this year has not yet been fully written. And it's really up to us in the choices that we're about to make as a country to decide what the most important thing to happen in 2020 will prove to have been. And if we get this right, for all of the chaos and the cruelty that has defined the era that has brought us to this point, and in particular these last few weeks and months, we could view this as the beginning of a decade that set America on a dramatically better trajectory. That actually led to an inclusive economy for all of us, that actually confronted systemic racism, that actually, just before it was too late, acted to stop the effects of climate change, and where we moved to secure the rights and freedoms that are so important to us in this country. Every time I think the stakes of this election couldn't get higher, something comes along to make that happen. And of course, that's what we're all still processing right now, after the loss of one of the most extraordinary jurists that this country has produced. With Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the bench, I knew that my rights were better looked after. And I think that was true for all of us in so many ways. Right now, there is a lot of attention to the politics of this, to the power plays, to the procedural drama, all of which is understandable. But I think it's also best for us to think about this moment in very personal terms. I think about the fact that my wedding, my marriage, my household, the most important thing in my life exists by the grace of a single vote, which was her vote on the US Supreme Court. The healthcare of millions of Americans, including loved ones for so many of us, depend on something that will arrive at the court in a matter of weeks. These are the stakes in terms of what's going to happen next. And yet one more reminder that politics and campaigns and elections and governance and government and law are not about the drama of the power plays. They are about the ways in which decisions made in big white buildings in Washington, D.C. wind up coming into our homes and our workplaces and our marriages, impacting us in the most direct and intimate ways. That's what's at stake. And that's what you're all part of in a season when I know that you're getting an awful lot of calls and appeals and requests and texts, and of course, emails asking you to generously contribute to really important campaigns. But that's what we have right now in these campaigns that we're supporting tonight. And so I'm so glad that we're part of this. Just consider for a moment what it would be like if we did set America onto a better trajectory. Because this is not just about what we're against. And there is plenty for us to recognize that we're coming together to be up against. It's also about what we have a chance right now to stand up for: higher wages, more inclusive country, a better life. And I know that these are themes that are resonating in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, a state on the cusp of demonstrating that there's no such thing as a permanently red state, in my community here in Indiana and communities across the country. So that's what I'm in this for. And that's why, even with the chaos and the cruelty and the, frankly, bleakness that we sometimes feel in this moment, why I'm also filled with hope and propelled to be part of this as you are. And nothing, I got to tell you, when there's pressure on my optimism, nothing fills my sails more than being with great leaders and great candidates like we are tonight. So thanks so much for joining us. And I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have.
Thank you so much, Mayor. So I believe we've got a few questions for you, and we're going to turn it over to Preet to ask you them.
Thanks, and it's an honor and a treat for me to be here with Mayor Pete once again. We've both been on each other's podcasts in recent months, and also to congratulate both Pat and Eugene on the campaign they've run so far. Proud to be a supporter of both, and I'm glad to see so many folks. I see a lot of participants here. I'm Preet Bharara. I used to be the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York until I got fired by President Trump. So I care about the future of the country for a lot of reasons, and I see a lot of bad things going on. So let me ask you, Pete, as we think about this very, important election, people say, I think this time correctly, the most important perhaps ever, but certainly in our lifetimes, depending on how long you've lived, it's probably always going to be true. Why is it important to expand the majority in the House? It's the one place that Democrats have control. Probably will keep that control, but what can happen, and why will the country be better if you expand it? And why is that important?
Yeah, this is critically important and probably not being talked about enough, especially because there's so much attention on all of the other also very important things that are going on in this political season. But for all of our frustration with Washington, and I've been channeling a lot of that in my own campaigns and politics, look what the House has been doing. We talk about an Equality Act to prevent discrimination. The House has passed it. We talk about action on COVID and making sure that we see through the steps that need to happen in order to secure our economy and improve our ability as communities to fight this. The House has acted. And yet these actions are right now, of course, gummed up in all the other branches. The House, though, has been the engine that has generated so many of these important policies, some of which did get through, right? To the extent we're doing anything as a country to keep our economy ahead of the worst consequences that could come from the pandemic, to the extent that we've seen any progress at all, it has been generated by the House. But when we maintain and expand the majority, it does two things. First of all, it reinforces that engine, and it means that we're even more secure. And also having candidates elected, and again, we've got two of them on the line right now, who have the right instincts in terms of having to explain to voters who maybe aren't just instinctively Democrats why this is important. That's going to be really important for governing, to win statewide in Pennsylvania, to succeed in North Carolina, to have had those experiences mean that we're going to have those voices that help us kind of shape what we believe needs to be the right policy in a way people can understand. Reason number two is when we have these victories, when we expand that majority, it sends a message about who we are as a country. I believe the only way we can generate shockwaves powerful enough to actually reunite the House and Senate GOP with their own conscience is for them to experience a loss of power as a consequence of protecting the wrongdoing of this president. I don't like to think in these kind of power politics terms, but it's clearly the only language that they understand. Just look at Mitch McConnell in these last couple of days. And that is something, a message that we need to be sending from the House side and the Senate side both. And that message will be received if we not only maintain, but grow this House majority.
So everyone says we need to work hard. There's just a few weeks left. Voting has already started in a number of states. So I guess this question has two parts. One, Mayor Pete, what are you doing in the coming weeks? How are you spending your time? Obviously, you're doing things like this. And then second, what can you recommend to other people who are on this Zoom call? What further things can they do to make sure that we have a larger majority in the fall?
Well, thanks. The biggest thing that we have to do is recognize that we are crossing now into voting season, and I'm starting to drop the phrase "election day" from my vocabulary and replace it with voting season, because voting is increasingly underway as we speak. So the work we're doing right now, fundraising, gathering resources, that remains critically important. It's a big part of what Win the Era is doing. It's why we've identified candidates like Eugene and Judge Timmons-Goodson and asked our network of supporters to pay attention to what they're doing and help. Now we've also got to make sure that that voter mobilization happens. And to be honest, it's easier to figure out how to move fundraising into this Zoom environment than it is how to move phone banking and canvassing and other forms of voter contact into this Zoom environment, especially when you couple it with the fact that we are talking about early vote, mail-in voting wherever we can, and not just one day. And so we've got to make sure that that message is getting out, that everybody has a plan to vote, that anybody who is still deciding how to vote hears our message of restoring competence and decency to government, and then anybody deciding whether to vote, which I think is just as big of a concern. Here's the message about just how much is on the line for all of us in these elections. There's a paradox right now. Because of everything that's going on, offices like elections to the US Congress and state and local offices have never mattered more. They're also not getting very much attention because of the titanic battles that are going on for the presidency and the Supreme Court. That's all the more reason for us to use the phenomenal network of supporters that is represented largely by the kinds of people who are on this call to elevate that and get folks thinking about the importance of winning up and down the ticket. Last thing I think is important, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on this too, Preet, is how to prepare Americans for what might be challenges to the legitimacy of the election itself, especially coming from Republicans who are defeated, beginning potentially with the president himself. We've got to make sure that we prepare the public for the idea that it might take a little while to get results in, and that we beat back any attempts to undercut our democratic system.
I agree with all that. I think our time is up, but I want to echo also, I think this point that is becoming increasingly clear, you're going to have a moment on November 3rd where Donald Trump is going to declare victory. And even worse than that, he probably will have his attorney general, who acts more like his lawyer than the lawyer for the American people, confirm, although it will not be confirmed officially, confirm that President Trump has won. And then who knows all manner of actions that will be taken to suppress the vote after the fact. We talked about suppression of the vote before the fact, but there can be suppression of the vote after the fact. And maybe we can get to some of that later in the program if you have questions about it. I turn it back to the other folks. Thanks, Mayor Pete.
Thank you so much, Preet, and thank you for helping us keep time. Really appreciate that. Mayor Pete, I know you have so much on your agenda tonight, so want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we will let you go.
Great. Well, thanks again for the great work that you're doing. And again, everybody help spread the word because these are races that we're really excited about. And if you look at Eugene's track record of imaginatively using the powers of an office, a lot of people have never even heard of, to protect and defend and support people on the issues of the day. That's just the experience we need in Congress. When you look at Pat Timmons-Goodson and what she has done from the bench and what she embodies, this is so important. And I can't wait to place those two celebratory phone calls in November with your help. So thanks for everything that everyone on this call is doing. And let's make sure we see this through. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a very large group of folks from across the country tonight. So I want to give our candidates a chance to introduce themselves. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat Timmons-Goodson for an introduction and to let us know what is at stake in North Carolina 8. Pat?
Good evening, all. I want to begin by thanking Mayor Pete and for the huge investment that you've already made in North Carolina. I want you to know it's already making a difference in some critical races, and I thank you for putting in the time and doing all that you've done for this nation. And your approach to politics, it really is refreshing, and it's so good to see. And we know that we're going to hear and read much more about you very soon.
Or disabled by default. Simply select.
Preet, thanks for staying in the fight. Want you to know I admire you tremendously. I don't have to tell you what a great lawyer you are. I admire your courage and your defense of the rule of law. So thanks for all that you're doing. Eugene, it's good to be with you. And thanks for your team putting all of this together. And so to all of you, I so appreciate you taking your time and Zooming in with us. I am Pat Timmons-Goodson. I'm the Democratic nominee for Congress in the 8th Congressional District here. And we are working hard to flip this seat from red to blue. I'm running because the citizens of the 8th Congressional District deserve so much more than they have. They deserve someone that's going to stand up for them and fight for them. And I want you to know that I'm doing all of that now. You know, we're all thinking of Justice Ginsburg. All across the country, there's a sadness. But I hope that we will turn her death into a galvanizing moment where women and all people who love justice and fairness will come together and do the heavy lifting that it's going to take for us to get this country back on the right track. North Carolina, as many of you know, is a critical state as we seek to change the national leadership. There are many, many folks at work. The Democratic Party in North Carolina is more unified than I believe I've ever seen it. Folks from all across the nation are engaged in helping North Carolina go blue. I was talking not long ago to an individual across the country that said, Pat, I'm glad that you're running. I could never do that, but I want to help. And she went on to explain that she had figured out that given the magnitude of the issues and the difficulties facing this country, that it's not enough to just work and control your part of the country, your community, your state. It's going to take all of us all across the country working together. And so she understood that, and she says that's the thinking of so many. I'm glad we're thinking that way because I believe that is what it's going to take. But I'm fighting hard. I'm hearing from the citizens in the 8th Congressional District that it is about healthcare. And so that's what I talk about: healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. It's affordability, it's accessibility, doing whatever it takes to make sure that all of our citizens can be cared for. In this pandemic, there is no way our economy is going to begin to go back to what we need it to be until we have the pandemic under control. And so thank you all, one and all, for all of your efforts that you're making to assist the candidates in North Carolina and to work to change the leadership in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Now I'm going to turn it over to Eugene.
Thank you, Alexis, for doing a great job pulling this event together. Your honor, it's going to be an honor to work with you in Congress, as I am sure you are going to not only win your district, but help flip North Carolina blue so we can get this country back on track. And your tenure as a judge is certainly a shining example for the Tar Heel State. Looking forward for getting a couple pieces of advice from you on how we can make sure that we are including everybody, not just one region of the country, but everybody as we try to get this country back on track. Preet, thank you for staying in the fight. Look, what you did and the stances you took are an example to all of us. Sometimes, maybe we all take one on the chin sometimes, but when you do it for the right cause and the right reasons, you come out better for it. And we're a better country because you served us as U.S. Attorney, and for the stances you took at the beginning of this administration, and for how you stayed the fight moving forward. And Mayor Pete, thank you for, Mayor Pete and I are in this thing called the New Deal Leaders, which is sort of this group that tries to think outside the box. Certainly I've tried to do that as auditor, which I'll talk about in a couple seconds, but having the courage to run for president. And it takes look, I think it takes courage to run for office in general, but it takes courage to run for president. You are putting your family, your loved ones, everyone on the line out there. And to do it as a mayor of South Bend, when, I mean, there weren't probably more than a handful of people that gave you a shot, and you shook the world and you gave it a real ride. And now staying in the fight, you are going to be a leader in this nation for many years to come. And certainly also thank you for your service to our country in uniform as well. We all owe you a debt of gratitude. My name is Eugene DePasquale, and I am the Democratic nominee for Congress in the Pennsylvania 10th District, and I am the sitting state auditor general. In this role over the last almost 8 years, I've rooted out over $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg. I found over 3,200 untested rape kits. Through my leadership, we've reduced that backlog by 97%, bringing a lot of creeps to justice. And I say creeps because anybody that does that to a man, and even some instances to a woman, or even our LGBTQ community, simply unacceptable. I found 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. Any single one of those calls could have been life or death for a child. I've worked hard to make sure our schools are not only getting more dollars to the classroom, but also making sure that they are safe environments for our students. And we've been aggressive in also auditing environmental programs and oversight of our nursing home industry. And when I was making the decision what was going to be the next step for me in life, I knew that the challenges of the next Congress were going to be so critical that I had to get in the fight, use my style of leadership, which has been tough and fair on both a Republican and Democratic governor, and been tough and fair on programs, whether they be liberal, moderate, or conservative policies over the last 8 years, that I thought Washington, D.C. could use that style of leadership. So I decided to run for Congress. The incumbent is Congressman Scott Perry. And let me just give you a couple reasons why it's important that we beat him. Number one, it was just announced today that a local county dinner will have as a guest speaker to promote Congressman Perry, and that is Jim Jordan. That is who Congressman Perry supported for speaker in the last election, was Jim Jordan. They are both in the Freedom Caucus together. When the federal government shutdown happened, Congressman Perry said, and I quote, "I don't know a single federal worker that lives paycheck to paycheck." Those were his words. When it came time to vote for the Affordable Care Act and whether it should be overturned or not, he said, "I'm tired of paying for women's health care. I've already had my kids." He's voted 12 times to take away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. That fight is personal for me. When I was a freshman in high school, we found out my brother had muscular dystrophy. Now, we didn't call it then, but to them, obviously then he was just my brother. But now we refer to that obviously as a pre-existing condition. My brother passed away when he was a sophomore in college. I was a first-year night law student. We were never able to have health insurance for him. And with all the strengths and weaknesses of the Affordable Care Act, one thing that I knew that was good about that law was it finally protected people with pre-existing conditions. My brother passed away. Not only was it emotionally devastating, it was financially devastating. And the compound matters for our family. My dad was incarcerated at the time. He was wounded in Vietnam, was prescribed synthetic heroin by the VA, no mental health counseling, which led to a pattern of addiction that eventually led to him being incarcerated. Looking out for our vets is also a critical fight for me. Every single day, a veteran commits suicide, every day. We've got to make sure we're looking out for our vets and also treating drug addiction as a disease it is, and looking to reform the criminal justice system that keeps our communities safe, and at the same time, looks out for the individuals who are nonviolent that need help with drug addiction. Congressman Perry simply has the wrong priorities. He simply has failed the district and he has failed the nation. And in this campaign, pre-COVID, obviously the issues that were mostly talked about were climate change, transportation, certainly prescription drugs and healthcare are critical issues, and we're going to continue to talk about them. But during COVID, it has become clear that Congressman Perry is on the wrong side of every single issue. He said when it came to education and getting our schools back up and running, that kids, literally students, couldn't transmit the virus to teachers. Those are, again, his words, not mine. And he recently said, and again, I wish I were making this up, that there's no such thing as systemic racism, and that the deaths of George Floyd and other people of color at the deaths of law enforcement are basically been exaggerated. Again, that's something that he said. This campaign is a dead heat. We're going into the last 6 weeks, and we can use all of your help, as can Pat. You know how this works. Everyone that's on this call works, whether it is donating, whether it is calling, texting. We can't do the traditional type of campaigning of going door to door. So we need your funds so we can air our television ads, and we also need your help, whether it's calling or texting, so we can reach voters that we can't reach through the traditional door to door. I'm sure Pat's doing the same thing. We've been running ads now for several weeks, and tomorrow we start a new ad talking about my record as Auditor General, rooting out waste, being the people's watchdog, and cracking down on the untested rape kits so we can better protect our communities. And I look forward to working again with candidates like Pat and other tremendous candidates across the country as we look to deliver an expanded majority. And here's one final thing that's important. I think this is an issue in North Carolina as well. The Pennsylvania delegation in Congress right now is 9-9. If for some reason this election cannot be decided by the Electoral College because of delays in counting the vote, my election will mean if I defeat Congressman Perry, Pennsylvania will go from 9-9 Democratic Republican to 10-8 Democratic, which means this could be the critical vote in Pennsylvania to make sure Joe Biden, even though he will clearly win the state, actually gets our votes if the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. So please, 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 this is all hands on deck the next 6 weeks. This is a critical time. And for myself, look, I'm a former college football player. And I know if you met me, you'd realize, I'm not a defensive tackle. Played wide receiver. I was pretty fast, had pretty good hands. But one thing I found out when I played college football, and certainly when it comes to this campaign, the day after the election, the only thing we want to say to ourselves is, did we do everything we can to win this thing? We're all on the same team. We all have a part to play. Let's do what we can to make sure that we get this country back on track. Thank you so much for this tremendous turnout for everyone. Thank you again, Preet, for giving your kids those great assignment on which campaigns to get involved in. Pat, thank you for your moral and ethical leadership as a judge, and certainly thank you to your team and my team for putting together a tremendous event. Looking forward to answering some questions and working with everyone to win this election and get our country back on track. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eugene. So we have some questions that are already submitted in the queue, and I do want everyone to be mindful that we've got to let Preet go because he has another engagement as well. So if you got a question for Preet, go ahead and submit it to the chat. Right now, I'd like to call on the first question in our queue. That is from Bobby Jasek. Bobby, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Oh, sure. This is a question for Judge Timmons-Goodson. It just seems to me that one of the most important priorities, I think, for our country right now is really looking at reforms for really, upholding our democracy. So voting rights, election reform, all of those types of sort of structural protections, protecting against political gerrymandering, and even I think more exciting things like ranked choice voting and looking at the number of people that serve in the House of Representatives. Districts are just getting so large now, having to represent so many people that maybe we need to add more. So my question for you was, you're perfect, I think, to champion these issues because of your experience on the North Carolina Supreme Court and because of your service on the Civil Rights Commission. And so I was just wondering if you had thoughts on how you, what sort of proposals in that sort of bucket of reform you think are the most important. And then as sort of a follow-up question, if you were able to get those passed in Congress and they became law, how would you handle that if you were on the US Supreme Court and those cases came before you?
Wow. Let me say that I believe that the biggest improvement and way of looking at things that I would seek to change would be how it is that we view voting. And as we all know, with our representative form of our democracy, folks aren't able to go and to speak for themselves. They choose a representative that is their voice. And so that makes voting critical. If indeed voting is as critical and as important as we say that it is, our actions, our laws need to reflect that. Something that's been talked about for many years is that as in other countries, perhaps we should make Election Day a holiday. What better way to say just how important it is that we hold voting? And so that would be a part of some of the discussions that I think should go forward. You know, we have a wonderful Constitution that has served the test of time, but times have changed. And we do need to look at making some improvements. Now, of course, our Constitution is one of the most difficult to change in the country. And so perhaps we need to look at how it is that we can make those changes a little more easily. But those would be places to begin.
Thank you. And we do have a question for Preet. This is from Benjamin. What are your thoughts on Attorney General Barr's recent comments that U.S. attorneys should not have the final say in sentencing recommendations and handling of cases?
Thanks for your question. You know, it's interesting. So many things happen so quickly in this country that we lose sometimes sight of the fact that something that we shouldn't appreciate happened very recently. And Bill Barr has given a couple of interviews in the last week, obviously legitimately overshadowed by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how to fill that seat. It's even worse than what you describe in the question. Bill Barr basically said that the lowest level people at the Justice Department shouldn't be making the final decisions in every way and setting the agenda for the Department of Justice, and compared them to preschoolers. The problem with what Bill Barr said is multifold. On the one hand, no one has made the argument that at the Department of Justice, the folks who are the rookies and the most entry-level people should be making decisions about the direction of the Department of Justice. So he sets up a straw man argument like he does on so many other things. At the same time, it's also an error, and I take great offense at it, because he's denigrating the backbone of the department. And it may be the case that there's a hierarchy like there is in every organization in the military and business, at universities, and also at the Department of Justice. That does not mean you go out and basically cast aspersions on the career public servants who serve all of us, who keep, you know, every district in the country safe and the country as a whole safe, and try to hold people accountable. They're public servants who should be championed, who, by the way, have other options and can, you know, sacrifice less and go make more money doing something else, and yet they choose to serve. So anytime you denigrate public servants with a straw man argument and you act more like the lawyer for the president than the lawyer for the people, I have a problem with that.
Great. I think we have about time for one more question for you. So I'm going to go ahead and direct a question from Melissa that was for Preet and our candidates. So how do we prepare ourselves for the contested election? What should we look out for, and how do we respond? Preet, do you want to kick us off?
It's a great question. I think it's a hard question. I think almost without doubt, there will be a contested election. That's what's been said. I think because of the dramatic shift that is different from one party to the other towards mail-in voting, it's almost certain that we will not have an official election winner for the presidency on November 3rd. And as I said earlier, when I was talking to Mayor Pete, I think it is almost certain that the president of the United States will declare victory. He's been laying the foundation for the idea that any votes that get counted, even though they're legitimately cast by mail, in most states in this country, don't matter because there will be fraud. And I think so. One of the things we have to prepare for mentally is not only ourselves, but explain to our neighbors, friends, people on the other side of the aisle, that patience is important, that patience is the order of the day, and that people should not rush to judgment as to who is the president just because Donald Trump says so. I think also there are things we can do to make sure that there's less contest than there might be. And I think most states you can volunteer not only to be a poll worker, but a poll watcher. I think you need to know what your rights are with respect to being able to cast a vote. We've seen some terrible scenes in some parts of the country where people are trying to block people from engaging in early voting. So you want to know your rights. You want to understand the arguments that are being made. And I think the most important thing, and this sounds a little bit like a panacea, you want to make sure that in whatever race you're working on or contributing to, or in the district you're voting in, get as many people to vote the way that you want them to vote so that the cases aren't close. But there's going to be a lot of legal wrangling. I think one thing to be optimistic about is that Joe Biden has hired or appointed to a committee, really, really, really powerful, smart, good election lawyers, expert election lawyers, who are prepared to fight in all 50 states if necessary, any shenanigans that go on that will cause the election to be contested.
Great. Well, Preet, I know we have to let you go soon. So if you'd like to say any other words before I let Pat and Eugene follow up.
Yeah, I have to go. Sorry, I have to go and talk about the Supreme Court vacancy in another forum. Thanks again for having me. It's a great honor. As some of you may have appreciated, I got into this project by sort of assigning to my boys, 15-year-old and 17-year-old, while they were sort of not as busy as they might have otherwise been in August, something that we called Housework 2020. And I had them recommend to me every day a House candidate to help either flip a seat from red to blue or to maintain a seat as blue. And two of the candidates here, Eugene and Pat, were ones that they, on their own research, recommended to me very strongly. I accepted the recommendation, and I'm glad to be part of this. Everybody work hard, continue to give. You know, you've seen how important money is. It's an unfortunate thing in our political system, and maybe we can reform that. Maybe the two of you can do something to reform that so we don't have to engage in so much requesting for money. But it is important, and at the time that we're at now, it's never been more important to get the message out, to help get voters out, and to make sure that these elections are not contested. So thanks again, proud to be with you, and good luck to the candidates.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So we've still got time for lots of questions for Eugene or Pat. So please continue to submit your questions into the chat, or again, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. I know that we have gotten several questions about ways to get involved, specifically besides fundraising, and how we can do that now that we've got the pandemic to consider. So I'll direct this question to Eugene. What is the campaign doing, and how can people reach out to voters without the usual door-to-door contact?
Great, thanks for the question. And look, we do get this question a lot. Number one, every night we're having some form of virtual house party, almost every night if we're not having 3 or 4 of them, like particularly on the weekends when we can have multiple. So that's one way. Look, it's not ideal compared to having the backyard barbecue where you're going and shaking hands and that type of thing and looking people, you know, in the eye. And even as the Auditor General, sometimes people have a separate issue they want to pull you aside and talk to you about. But it is a way that we are working around not being able to certainly have large gatherings. That's number one. Number two, there are some events that we've gone to in person in parks and open spaces. We're trying to be respectful of protecting people, and also, I only ask my staff to do things that they're comfortable doing as well. So we want to make sure that we're protecting people, practicing what we preach. But some open air events that are not large gatherings, we've also have done that. But the bulk of our voter contact beyond television and mail, of course, is we're doing a calling and texting program every single day. And so the more, and we, sometimes there's these groups that, particularly because Pennsylvania is a swing state, Maryland New York, New Jersey right around us are not swing states, we would get a lot of volunteers coming in to door knock into our region. Well, obviously, that's not happening. So we're getting those same people that, would not, maybe would have been coming up to knock on doors or lit drop. They're now doing calling and texting from their home. We do that every single day. We've got GOTV calls, we've got persuasion calls, and we're doing that every single day. So if you want to be a part of that, you can go onto our website and sign up, or you can email the campaign at info@eugeneforcongress.com. Why Eugene for Congress as opposed to DePasquale? Look, we know people are going to screw that up, how they type in DePasquale. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible and do Eugene. So it's eugeneforcongress.com, and our website is eugeneforcongress.com. So I think it's in the chat now, info@eugeneforcongress.com. It's a way to email the campaign to offer any services you want to have, whether it be calling or texting, at least until, and I don't think we're going to be doing any door to door, but we may end up doing no contact lit dropping as well. So.
And Pat, how can folks get involved to help out your campaign?
Well, they certainly can go to our website and volunteer. The kinds of things that we're doing are very similar to what Eugene is doing. The one additional aspect that I would add is that it would be good to follow us on social media. If you see something that we've said or done that you like, please feel free to share it with your friends, and that further gets the word out. I continue to be amazed at just how much contact and how productive efforts like that are. We are looking at doing no contact lit drops. We see that the Republicans in our state have been far more active in terms of personal interaction than we have been, but we have tried to be safe and practice as much care with not only our staff and volunteers, but also throughout the community. So if you're interested, please, you can go to info@Timmons-Goodson-for-Congress.com. Also go to our website, and there are places for you to volunteer there as well. One of the things that we're doing is bringing back forms that years ago we used in terms of note cards and writing. It's just that all of that's being done through a Zoom call instead of in person as we once did. But we're sending out postcards that are handwritten, and individuals are sending them to their friends, encouraging them to get out and to vote, and to take someone with them or make sure that someone else goes out.
Thank you so much. Next in the queue, we have a question from Robert Orr. Robert, would you like to unmute yourself, or shall I read your question?
I'm happy to ask it. I was wondering about the perception that the candidates have of those serving in the military, how they're feeling about the election and about issues impacting the military forces and those serving it.
I'm going to, since Fort Bragg is in the 18th congressional district, I'll take that, Justice Orr. What I'm hearing from the military is disappointment in the statements that have been made by our president. Folks have many have come to the decision that, in fact, he made the statements, as they even look at Fox News verifying the information, and that he's made statements consistent with that in other contexts. And so our military expressed to me a disappointment that their commander-in-chief would be saying the kinds of things that he's saying. But I'm gonna tell you, I am more than disappointed. It angers me. My father was a sergeant in the U.S. Army, served 2 tours in Vietnam, lost friends, Other friends returned, but they were not in the same condition that they were when they left. Lives forever altered, and I promise you, they were not suckers or losers. They gave a great deal to our country, and they deserve so much more from their commander-in-chief. And so I believe that there is going to be a reckoning where our president and the military is concerned. Traditional, the military has been Republican. I think that there are going to be some surprises in that regard.
Yeah, I'll just follow up a little bit on Pat. Look, we have the Army War College in the district. We have a lot of defense contractors in the district, and certainly there is a large veteran, and particularly former veteran or retired veterans in the district as well from every single war. And the idea that, look, does anybody really doubt that he said that they're suckers and losers? Does anybody really doubt that? I mean, the fact that General Kelly wouldn't comment on it when he was there, that to me is all you need to know there. Look, I don't care if it's someone's your worst enemy. If you were there and you know they didn't say it, you would make that clear. His silence was all I needed to know on that. And beyond that, there's two critical issues beyond whether some of the places of conflict, whether we should still be there or not. Because of the recent behavior, you forget that it wasn't that long ago, basically like 2 months ago, that the significant allegation was raised whether the Russians were paying bounties to kill American soldiers. We've got to get to the bottom of that. And again, look, do I believe there's a pretty good chance it happened? Yes, but we've got to get to the bottom of that and have a full, transparent investigation on that. And if it is true, there needs to be consequences to the Russian government. That's number one. And number two, I talked about it before and I'll continue to say it. Every single day in this country, veterans are committing suicide. We have to figure out why and what needs to be done to stop it. The multiple tours so many people have gone in Afghanistan and Iraq clearly have left so many of our veterans mentally scarred beyond the physical scars that so many of us can see. We've got to do right by them because they did right by us. And so those are the two big priorities I talk about. And I do believe, and again, we haven't polled veterans specifically in the district, but just if our emails are any indication, we have a lot of veterans that are active that for a host of reasons, aren't going to go public, but a lot of retired veterans that are willing to lend their name to this campaign to show their support simply because they're exhausted with what has been happening out of the Oval Office.
Thanks, Eugene. So I'm going to call on one of our hosts for tonight, Dave Fetterman. Dave?
Hey guys, how do you personally handle talking to people who are still, quote, in the middle or still making up their minds after the preponderance of evidence of both word and action on the national stage, as if there were some evidence that was still waiting to come in? You can tell I'm already mad just talking about this. How do you talk to people who view themselves as centrist, who maybe voted for both sides over the past few decades, but now find themselves either saying, well, they're all crooks and I don't care and it's all rigged anyway, or, well, I'm still thinking real hard about all this really complicated stuff that where I couldn't possibly make a decision without real personal reflection?
I'll start off. Maybe I think we'll go back and forth on who starts. So if it's okay, Pat, I'll go first. We thought as a campaign it was important because look, if you're just the average Joe, I can get it why people sometimes think, I'm just frustrated, regardless of what the issue is. I get it, right? And they see the ads and all the other stuff, and sometimes DC turns into a battle of talking points. We thought it was important to talk about my life story. Growing up in a bar, my family owned a bar restaurant. How my first job was bussing tables, and I was a Little League umpire, and I was a janitor. Even though I played baseball and football, I was also a janitor to help pay my way through college. We thought it was important because people see me on television as the auditor talking about my audits, but they didn't know that part of my story. We also talk about my dad and being wounded in Vietnam and his addiction battles and having to come to my brother's funeral in shackles and losing a brother to muscular dystrophy. And certainly we're going to talk about, starting tomorrow, when a new ad starts, my record as Auditor General and holding powerful people accountable, and cracking down on untested rape kits, child abuse faults in the child abuse system, to show that I've actually kicked the tires, found ways to make government work better. And I'm going to bring that leadership to Washington, D.C. And then talk about where my stance is on the issues. But we thought, and I thought it was important that people had to know where I came from and what my values were growing up. Anyone that has a small bit, that grew up in a small business, your whole family's life is built around that, and how you're working it in some way, shape, or form. My mom was doing that, working days there. My dad was working nights there before he was obviously incarcerated, while my mom was getting us ready for school and making lunches. And we were in the neighborhood so we could walk to practice and stuff like that, because my brother and I played football and baseball, football from the time 6th grade all the way through college. For me, he didn't play in college, but we ended up winning a state title in football in high school and all that other stuff. But finding ways to make that work, walking to school and all that stuff, and just letting people know that that was my life story. That's who I am, and I'm going to take those values to Washington when I win this thing.
All right, everyone. Well, I know that we have about time for one more question, and we have to let our candidates go to do their next things. Pat, I want to turn this over to you. We have gotten multiple questions from folks about how the campaigns are reaching out to college students, young voters. Can you tell us what you're working on to reach out to that demographic?
Yes, we are indeed reaching out to that demographic, because our research and look at this race shows that that is the group that I might very strongly appeal to. And so we're reaching out primarily through social media to them, and we're talking about the subjects that we believe they care about. That is the demographic that has the lowest voting percentage. And so it also follows that people vote when they believe they have a stake in what's happening. And so more and more, I believe that our young people are beginning to understand that indeed they have a stake in their community. They're talking about change. Well, there's more than one way to bring about change. Yes, you can march and protest and bring it to the attention of others, but voting is also a manner in which to make your voice heard. And so with our college students, we're making sure that they understand that. We are reaching out to them primarily through social media, and then also through some of the, not television as such, but some of the other forms of entertainment that they watch. And the indication is that we're reaching some to reach many more, but we are reaching them. And then the mailings that we send out, the direct mail pieces, that is another way to reach out to them. And trying to make sure that we have a strong online presence. And so there's a lot of material about my stance on issues, and about my past and my family. So we're reaching out in multiple ways.
Thank you. Eugene, do you want to add some final answer on how we're reaching college voters here?
I mean, the only thing I'll add is, Instagram we found has been a pretty effective tool on that. A lot of younger voters are on Instagram, and certainly using social media aggressively as well. And our digital campaign, I certainly get, look, I've got a son that's a junior in college, a daughter that's a junior in college. My son and my daughter is a senior in high school. To be blunt, they don't read broadcast, but they certainly read the paper online, sometimes national, maybe New York Times or the Washington Post more so than the local paper. And I think that's pretty similar to, young people across the country, which is not always reading their local paper, but certainly up to speed on national events. But they're on a lot of these websites. So we've tried to be aggressive on the digital side of the campaign as well. We've known, for example, that a lot of the environmental message digitally, and certainly on the social justice side as well.
Thanks, Eugene. All right, we are about at time for this event. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I want to turn it over to Pat and Eugene for closing remarks. Pat?
Thank you so very much. Let me say once more that you've taken your time to be with us this evening. I know that this may be about the last thing that you'd want to do, another Zoom call. But thank you so very much for being with us. I tell you, there's a lot of work left to be done, but I believe that if we all pitch in and each do what you can, we're going to be able to make the changes that are necessary for this country to get back on the right track. And of course, the changes will come with changing the leadership at various levels. As Frederick Douglass said, that he prayed for freedom for 10 years, but freedom didn't come until he marched with his feet. Well, we're all marching with our feet now, trying to get the changes in our leadership. We're marching with our feet as we're registering others, as we're participating in texting and emails, and as we come together like this to learn and to encourage one another. So thank you so very much for praying with your feet as I'm praying with my feet. You can, if you want to learn more about me, go please to Timmons-Goodson-for-Congress.com. You'll find opportunities or ways in which you might volunteer, as well as do whatever you can to assist the campaign. So thanks for coming out this evening, all.
Thank you, Pat. Looking forward to serving with you. Everyone, again, EugeneForCongress.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at DePasquale PA, and on Facebook, it's Eugene A. DePasquale. We're going to be posting new ads tomorrow morning. Be great if you could help share that with your friends and your network so they can see the type of campaign we're running, the type of work I've done as Auditor General, and the type of leadership I want to bring to Washington, D.C. Everyone, thank you so much for being a part of this event, whether it's donating, volunteering, all of it. All hands on deck, 6 weeks to go. As my college football locker room said, exit exhausted. Let's exit exhausted and win this thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. All right, take care.